Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lead, Sell, Grow, the Human Experience Podcast. It's so good to be with you guys here. If you're not in the Facebook community yet, get your butt over there. Lead, Sell, Grow, the Human Experience Mastermind, so that we can connect. So I understand who you are, you get to know who I am, and we can actually chat in the group. Anyway, my guest today, I got a chance to meet Evans Putman through a mutual friend of ours, Laban Ditchburn. If you don't know Laban, he's a freaking character. That's probably the best way I can describe him. And he's been on the show before as a guest, but he's a character. So he reaches out, he says, hey, you gotta meet my buddy Evans Putman. When characters say you gotta meet my buddy, I'm usually open arms and open, ears, because I love meeting new people. Evans and I connected a few weeks back, and I absolutely fell in love with him. I said, you got to come on my show. And here's why. One, he's a creator of Podcast Sales Machine, Infinite Impact Method, and he's now just launching Servepreneur, his new community that we're going to hear all about. What I really thought was super cool is if you guys follow any of Russell Brunson's stuff, he's the creator of ClickFunnels. Evans' trainings are inside of Russell Brunson's high ticket coaching program. So Russell Brunson is like, hey, Evans, can you teach these entrepreneurs in my high ticket coaching program? The other reason I wanted to bring Evans on the show is because Evans has a unique gift to help entrepreneurs attract clients and make money. So this is what the show is about. Lead, sell, grow. We got to lead ourselves. We got to sell and we got to grow so that we can help others. Evans, welcome to the show, my friend.
Oh, thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Thanks for that great introduction. And circling back, I remember our first meeting, we just hit it off and I enjoyed it so much. And then you were on a whirlwind travel tour over the past month. I saw you're doing a lot of really cool stuff out there. So I'm glad we're finally getting a chance to get back together and to have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been it has been a wild few months. Texas, then Jamaica, then Relentless Goal Achievers is keeping me busy. So Evans, you actually had a successful business that you sold. Walk me through that company and how you got started, the podcasting company.
Yeah, well, that was actually the third one. Before that, I had a couple other ones just through the years that, because I've been doing this for 20 plus years now. When I went back, I was actually on a podcast and somebody asked me to reflect on my years as an entrepreneur. And I started thinking about it. And I went back to the Wayback Machine and archive.org and was able to pull up my first ever business, which was called Charleston Arts, etc. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I somehow built like an e-commerce business featuring local craftspeople, artists, and things like that, all because I had a friend who was struggling to sell his artwork. And that was the first business I sold when I left town to go coach basketball, which is another one of my passions. So that's way back when. And then another one came along.
Way back
skip
when?
ahead.
Like what year are you talking about way back when?
It was about 21 years ago. So
like
we're
early
talking
2000s, you started an e-commerce business.
I didn't know what that was. Yeah. I had no idea. Right. I don't even know if that term was out there, but we, I actually had to have a company in town build a website, which then if I wanted anything done to it, I had to reach back out to them. I mean, it was a long, complicated process, much different than ClickFunnels, which you mentioned earlier. Right. And I had this big, giant, heavy piece of machinery, which people probably won't even know what this is, but felt like it weighed like 20 pounds. That was how you ran cards, right? In the day. So I'd have to get the numbers. People would have to order through this order processing. I would have to take the email, enter the information into this machine, which then processed the card so they could get their stuff.
Oh my gosh.
It was like, I mean, it's crazy to think about how far we've progressed, right, since then. But yeah, there was no Stripe. There was no YouTube. I don't even think there was PayPal back then. I don't even, I had to go through a regular bank and get a merchant account just to process payments. And it all started just because I was a personal trainer at the time, and I had a buddy who I like to hang out with on Saturdays. And he spent like 2 of his Saturdays a month in this art gallery volunteering to try to sell his stuff. And I was like, I bet we could do that. We could sell it online. And then you and I could hang out on Saturdays and hit the beach and do the fun stuff. So that was there was a problem, right? I solved the problem to help him, but also because I was like, I want to hang out with my buddy. And so that sort of ballooned into bringing all these other people online. We said Tony the Peanut Man. We sold his peanuts, like canned peanuts through there. He had a roadside stand. I had a lady that had a roadside stand that did sweetgrass baskets. We sold those. It was pretty crazy. It was a learning experience. I just sort of fell forward into it and kept going and going. And then one of the people on my sites, a lady that was an artist, when she found out I was moving to Raleigh, North Carolina, she was like, well, hey, what are you going to do with the website? And I was like, well, I don't even know. I was like, do you want to buy it? And so I ended up selling her the business and didn't make a huge windfall, but I got back, all the money I'd put into it and a little bit more, plus the profits that had come in previously. So it was my first experience in the online business world.
That's pretty cool. And then what did you do? Why were you moving to Raleigh?
That was when it's a long story, but I went and coached basketball. I'd been a coach in college. So I went and started coaching at this high school, Broughton High School in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was an assistant on the varsity team. And it ended up being amazing because we had the number, depending on which standings you looked at, we had the number one player in the country on our team that we were coaching. He was either 1 or 3. And this guy, the year before I got there, he had a basketball that was auctioned at a charity that brought in more money than a Michael Jordan basketball.
No way.
That's how popular he was in the area. And
did he go to the NBA?
He went on to play at Duke for a year or two, went into the NBA, sort of played multiple places, played for the Sixers, the Celtics. I can't even remember. I think he played at 10 different teams in the NBA. He was one of those journeymen. And then he's ended up playing in China. And I'm pretty sure that they erected a statue outside of the arena for him because he had broken all these like scoring records in China. So that was that's what took me on that journey to sort of dive into it. Because to be honest, at the time I was doing personal training. I was running that e-com business, is which I'll call it that now, even though back then I had no idea what we were calling it. But I really wasn't, I was sort of unsatisfied in my life and wasn't excited. And I had that opportunity present itself. And I went and did that. I traveled the country in the summer and did basketball camps. And I sort of caught the bug again. And that's where all of a sudden this opportunity opened up, where my former friend who was coaching the varsity team was like, hey, I need somebody to come help. Would you be willing to take the position? Because I don't want to have to find somebody who hasn't been a part of the program before. And it just took me on a crazy journey. I mean, I got to sit in practices at Cameron Indoor and Duke. And this is coming from a kid. I grew up a kid who used to just sit outside all day long shooting basketball, dreaming that I was playing in these arenas that I was now sitting in. We went to Madison Square Garden. We went to Duke Indoor, Cameron Indoor. We actually played the UNC Tar Heels, the JV team, inside the Dean Dome. And it was just like, how is this happening? Right. This is what I used to dream of as a kid. But as a kid, I was hitting the winning shot, beating those teams. Now I was sitting on the sidelines, meeting the coaches, actually in the locker rooms on these famous courts, coaching basketball. So it turned out just to be a crazy experience that I had no idea was going to happen when I said yes to that adventure.
That's freaking awesome, man. So, all right. So walk me through to the next business.
Yeah. The next thing we did, I moved back to Charleston for a lot of personal reasons, but I was back in Charleston at the time. And I was like, how can I started doing some online personal training and online marketing and sales for personal trainers, where I had a background. I just fell in love with marketing. I started learning about it. And so at this point, I was reaching out to trainers online, and I would sort of look at their website And I would reach out to them and say, hey, here's some things that I think you could do to improve the sales on your website. And I'd give them 3 or 4 things. They'd be like, hey, thanks. That's amazing. We didn't know each other. So they're like, thanks. And I'd send them a few emails for an email sequence to help them out. And then I'd end up getting, what else can we do? So we'd start talking and I'd start working with them. So from there,
Wait,
I was
do you
like,
know what
this
I
is
love about that, by the way? That you actually gave advice. Like, I get emails right now about like my website, these screenshots, or some freaking guru, wherever the hell he is, with my
Mhm.
website behind him as he's scrolling through. And clearly it's a recording, because my name's not mentioned, nothing. He's like, as you can see, your website is blah 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 blah. But they focus on pointing out like all the wrong shit, and they don't
Right.
understand that, like, I don't care. Like, that's a brochure. I'm
Mhm.
positive there's 10,000 things I could do to improve my website. But when that's your whole world, you're going to think that that's like my whole world, and it's not. It's just a
Mhm.
website. But if somebody did reach out, so when I get an email, and I'm an optimistic, positive guy, so if I get an email out of a blue from a stranger telling me how shitty my website is, that person's like, you're dead to me. I don't want
Right.
to talk to you. Don't call me. Like, I'm never responding to that email. However, if I got an email like yours, like, hey, just a couple tips here, I would probably say, okay, let me pick your brain. So
Mm,
kudos to you on
yeah.
that.
Oh, well, thanks. Thanks. And it also helped too, because I came from a personal training background. I'd done sales. I'd run teams in personal training before in gyms. So for me, to be honest, I was just trying to figure out how to sort of create a business and that had freedom attached to it, freedom of time. Right. And it was hard to do back then because there weren't a lot of options. We actually had this thing called Fitness Generator, which was a online personal training, like workout creating tool, but it was little cartoon people that didn't move. I mean, this is still a little bit far back, right? So I transitioned to that, but what I did was I went and found the guy that created that. And I'm like, this is really cool. And I wanted to pick his brain. And that sort of led me to the next step of reaching out and doing sort of these audits for personal trainers, because I would sign up for their email list and I'd look at what came back to me. And then I would just write them. I wouldn't even say like, hey, your emails are crappy. I'd be like, hey, I'm a personal training marketing expert. I'm also a personal trainer. I'm great at sales. I was like, here's some emails we used to help us with XYZ. Right. And so I'd give them to them that way. So that sort of broke the barrier. And from there, I don't know why I started doing that, because I played a little bit of golf at the time, but I didn't really like it because it took too much time. Right. But I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Myrtle Beach is just up the road. Like, I'm in this golf mecca up and down the coast here. We got Hilton Head just below us. So a lot more golf courses, and Kiowa, where I think the PGA championship was played a couple years back, or the US Open. I can't remember, maybe both. But I started a business called perfectgolfvacations.com. Once again, another one of these things where I had no idea what I was doing, but it was basically an affiliate marketing business, because all I did was I created content. This is while I was doing the personal training stuff. I was doing this too. And this sort of took over because I started making money. And I would create content that was search engine friendly. It would send people to there. I had a deal set up with this company that did golf vacations. I didn't have to fulfill, they did the fulfillment. So this was still back when, we get paper checks. So there still wasn't the money, but I would like go to my bank. I go to my mailbox and it'd be a check for like $500, $700, $1,000. And I was like, I sort of like this. Right. So I kept
Great.
doing it and doing it. Then I built into where you could book tee times and I would get commissions on every tee time. So it was basically SEO based content that I was learning how to create. And I actually, at the time, there was probably about 4 or 5 months where things were going really well, because I ranked in the top 3 on Google for Myrtle Beach golf vacations organically. And that's when I saw checks coming in and I was like, this is amazing. So
Okay,
when I
hold on
was
one second.
ready
So
to,
what you were doing there, that's called content marketing?
Mm-hmm.
So give
Yeah.
me an idea of what that actually looks like. So you're writing something, you're putting it somewhere, and you're making sure that the words are the types of words that people are searching for when they're looking for a vacation in a golf spot. That's pretty much, did I understand that?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what did you like? One, how did you figure out which words to use? And two, what was the type of content you would put out?
Well, there were a lot of tools you could use, right? You could just go find these free keyword tools that would tell you this. It's not as doesn't nowadays you can get so much better information, but the competition's a lot different too, right?
Sure.
And we also had AdSense back then. So this is back when Google AdSense, they would place ads on your site as well. So when people clicked on those, you would get money also. So this was back at a time where a lot of people were doing these, like even Russell Brunson, and he talks about this. A lot of like himself and people that he knew were creating these little mini sites based on SEO, 1 or 2 pages just to rank really high. And then they get money from Google AdSense. But I sort of took it a little bit deeper and I was thinking, okay, what are the top golf destinations? But then the company I worked with that had the golf vacations, that's how I chose the content, right? Because if they had golf vacations in there was some places up in Canada, which I can't remember the name. It was on the West Coast up near Vancouver, a really nice area. There were places out in Arizona, obviously, Scottsdale, Phoenix, all these great locations. Everywhere they did the golf vacations, I would just go and I'd figure out keywords that I could create content around. And this is where I guess this is where my college education sort of came into play, because I had a writing and editing degree at NC State University. So I'm finally using my college degree for a purpose, right? Because writing it's one of these skills that I know you do a lot of speaking, so it reminds me of speaking, right? If you can write really well and you can speak really well, those skills transition across all different sort of businesses, no matter what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that was the key, was learning to really write well and then using the tools and just having no idea what failure was, because it's like, I'm just doing it and we'll see if it works or not. And then, checking. And sometimes your keyword, those pages that ranked really high, the problem was 4 or 5 months later, they could be like down at number 50 and you're not getting any commissions. So there was a lot of,
they do it.
there was a lot of lack of control, right? So this was back in the older, like I would also write articles for all these article websites that would have backlinks back to my website. So this was back when a lot of this stuff was going on that, doesn't really work now. And when Google would update their algorithm, you would go from, a nice monthly paycheck to down to practically nothing. But
you know what I love?
I had a guy that helped me build this website initially, the design of it, right? That he gave me and at this point I didn't have to go to anybody. I was using a tool, I think it was called SiteCell, where I could go in and I could update my pages myself. So we were moving a little bit farther along into the world of easier use of technology, right? But the guy that designed it to make it look pretty, I went back to him and I'm like, this is doing great. Thank you again for doing this. And I was sort of shifting again to where I just sort of lost my excitement around it. I'd built out so much content. I was seeing how AdSense was dropping. I was seeing how Google was changing their algorithms regularly, and I had no control over what was happening in revenue, because it all depended, just like sales, on how many eyeballs got on the page, right? So I ended up selling that to him because he saw that I was able to show him, look how much money we've made. And now it's this massive website with, hundreds of pages on it. So he was able to use that and just turnkey business when he jumped into it because he loved that stuff. So he's like, I'll keep going with it. I was like, okay, you can have it.
That's
Let's
awesome.
figure out what it's worth.
You know what I love about what you said? That it was like an aha moment for me. You said I would write content around the keywords. And I think for me, I think I focused too much on getting the content out not really even considering some keywords. But
Yeah.
you're
And I
saying your
think
whole
that's really,
content strategy is around keywords.
yeah. And it's still important now,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Even with your podcasts,
Mhm.
when it comes to headlines, when it comes to descriptions, it's not as much in the podcast space. It's not as much search engine oriented as it is in hooking the reader, right? Getting their attention and then being able to hold it, pull them in. But when it
Unless you're
comes
on
to things
YouTube,
like,
right?
yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
YouTube, when you switch over to like YouTube, now you're looking at, you're still in, I mean, YouTube's the world's biggest search engine.
Mm-hmm.
It gets more searches than Google itself, right? Is YouTube. So you're definitely right. It's a skill that was able to transition, and you start learning a lot of things like, how many different ways can you say Myrtle Beach golf vacations? And you start looking, it's like, okay, I can write Myrtle Beach golf, but that keyword is going to be really hard to rank for. So what can I find, like best restaurants to eat after playing a round of golf in Myrtle Beach? Even something as long and crazy like that, you would get searches for it. And guess what? Not many people are writing stuff around that.
Crazy.
So you'd pull somebody in and then they'd start looking at your other stuff. So, but a lot of that still transitions over. I think a lot of what it helps me with now is more around the hooks, right? Starting to think how do people, what are they looking for? What's important to them? What do they want to learn about? Rather than how do I rank for? Right. So I sort of pulled back from that and I start thinking about, okay, now to me, it's almost more important to create content from the user's point of view, your ideal dream client versus the search engine.
Oh, yes. Love it. Because they're the ones searching.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool. So you sold that company. What was next?
Well, next I started doing mostly like marketing consulting, just for anybody and everybody. Doing a lot of, creating marketing strategies, whether it was you're launching your first online business, whatever that looked like. I mean, we're still talking probably like 8 years ago or so, maybe a little bit farther back than that. Actually, probably longer. Yeah, longer than that, because my daughter's 12 now. So we're talking more like 13 to 14 years ago, moving forward. And so I was doing a lot of that one-on-one clients, doing great. I had like 3, I guess we could call them like whales, right? Like 3 clients that were just paying the bills. Like they were flooding me with work, with money. It was great. I got lazy and it ended up not continuing to fill my pipeline on the back end. So that was a big lesson. And one of them was a nonprofit. They lost a lot of their grants. Sorry, Evans, we can't keep working together. I can't remember what happened with the other ones, but different circumstances, they all hit at once. And this was, I think my daughter was probably like 2 or 3 at this point. And so all of a sudden I found myself with, I think, 2 clients that were like tiny little clients that barely, scratched the surface. I think it was enough to pay like the utilities and maybe part of the mortgage. So I started having to find something else. And that's when I sort of beat myself up for a day or 2. And then I was like, okay, I could just sit here and do this, but what good is that going to do? That's not, pity's not going to pay the bills. So I got to go figure something out. And so I started looking again. And the crazy thing about this story is I see this at this point. I was focusing on the real estate industry because I did have a real estate license and I had some investment properties. All right. So because of that, I gotten smart enough to say, hey, I'm a marketer for real estate agents, real estate investors. So that really helped being able to raise my price because now I was specializing. So I'm looking online and I see this guy, he's talking about real estate podcast, is looking for somebody to write show notes. And I was like, okay, this is like something that I might have done 15 years ago. But for some reason that message, that it just stuck in my head. I kept thinking about it, even though I was sort of like, I'm not going to do that. That's something that's minimum wage. It's not going to pay. I kept going and going and going. And then something told me, just message this person. So I messaged him. And we start talking, and the crazy thing is that he lives in the same town as me. I'd never worked with somebody who lived in the same town as me. My clients were like from Australia, from all over the world. Turns out I live in Charleston. I'm on the north side of Charleston, the peninsula. He's on the south side at Folly Beach. And so I'm like, well, let's get together, right? Just to sort of learn more. And so when I met him in person, and he was in real estate, and I started looking him up, doing a little background, seeing, finding out that he had sold like $1 billion with a B, $1 billion of real estate, was like friends with Gary Keller, all these like things. And I'm thinking, okay, I know people in real estate, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm not going to like this dude at all. We're not going to get along. He's going to show up in a suit, and this is me, basically. What you see now is me, right? But I'm like, he's going to show up in a suit, big old fancy watches, a big, huge, fancy car. And he shows up and he's like driving a Jeep. I drive a Jeep, right? Top off. He pulls up. I see him because I don't know it's him, but I'm wondering, I'm like, I think this might be him. He gets out. He's got like a t-shirt on, cargo shorts, flip-flops. And I'm like, okay, this is starting to look like it might be cool, right? So he meets with me and we start talking. Well, what I did, Eric, was instead of like just saying, okay, show notes for a podcast, I was like, what is it? What is your real aspiration for what you're looking to do beyond the podcast? I was like, do you have like dreams beyond the podcast, or is it just the podcast? So he starts sharing all this stuff, how he wanted to build a real estate sales training platform so he could give back everything that he had benefited from. He wrote a book called 6 Steps to 7 Figures, where he talked about how he worked 3.5 days a week and made all this money, was able to hang out with his family. So he had this really cool purpose behind what he did. And so we hit it off, and I was like, give me the weekend and I'll come back to you on Monday. I'm going to give you a plan for that entire business. Right. And so now I turned that little minimum wage show notes into an actual, we're building a business. And he loved what he saw. So we started working together, and he's like, we start working together, and he's like, I got to go. I'm going to Korea or Japan. I can't remember, for like a month. Will you just take control of the business? So he basically hands me the keys. So we keep working together. We're growing the podcast. The podcast was the engine that drove the business. Right. Everything. We didn't do any other kind of marketing, nothing. It was all the podcast, called Real Estate Rockstars with Pat Hyben. And we grew that within, and this is coming from someone who had I didn't know anything about growing a podcast or anything really that was going on, but I was like, okay, it can't be any different than growing any other kind of business. It's got the same principles. So I focused on the same principles I'd used in the past. And we used a content marketing strategy. Imagine that, right? To grow a podcast. And people were blown away by what we were doing, because within 6 months, we had grown it to 75,000 monthly listeners, where before he had grown it to about 6,000, 5,000, and it kept dropping back and forth. But we were steady at averaging 60 to 75,000 monthly listeners. Within 12 months, we had it to 150,000 on average each month. We never topped 200,000, no matter how hard we tried. We got up to like 190, something like that. But it was all done by just sort of taking the same principles I had learned every step of the way through all these different businesses and different iterations of my career. I took the skills and the things that worked from those, and we put them into this podcast. And then we went from, we were growing it, we weren't getting leads. So then we figured out how to get leads, and we were getting leads at 78.6% on our opt-in page. So 8 out of 10 people that came from the podcast that got on our opt-in page. Now, it wasn't all 150,000 of them, but we had a really good way of getting people over to it. 8 out of 10 would opt in. Then I started looking at the numbers. We built a back-end funnel off of it to sell our sales training, and 80% of our best buyers came from that list of those 8 out of 10. But we created all of this in a way that we were doing everything that everybody told us to do before, and things weren't working. So we sort of scrapped it and Pat and I would get together. And the great thing about Pat was he was, at this time, we had progressed from me being just a contractor to actually being a partner in the business. And the great thing about him was he's just like, just try it. It's one of the biggest lessons I learned from him was like, let's just try it. Before, I was one of these guys that was like, I wanted to know what was going to happen 4 steps down the road after I started doing it. And he was just permission to fail. Let's just fail forward. And everything that we tried with a permission to fail that seemed crazy to us and to anybody we told it to worked, because it came from our own intuition, our own heart, right? Not from somebody else. We took the principles that always work, but we put in our own sort of way of doing things. And our unique ability, our unique methods is what ended up growing the business and making it so successful. And here's where it gets crazy, though, because I know we talked about selling that business. I created the system that turned that into, he always called it, he's like, it's like I had an ATM. The podcast became an ATM. It just ran on autopilot. I ended up leaving the business about 4 months before it was sold, because we didn't know we were going to sell it. But I left because I was like, I've done this now, and I feel like I have a bigger calling to go help other people take their purpose, turn it into a business that can reach so many people and change as many lives. Because all the feedback we were getting from people about the lives being changed, it was mind blowing. And it was because Pat started with a purpose. And when I went to him to tell him this, at first I was like, I ran all these scenarios in my head, how, Eric, you're sitting there thinking you're creating this imaginary future that's not going to happen. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going to be horrible. He's going to be so mad at me. The business is going to fall apart when I leave. When we met, he looked at me, and the first thing he said after I explained my why of leaving, he looked at me, he's like, how can I help? And I was like, I knew all along from the first time we met that it was the right person to work with. Right. And, so then I left. He got rid of about half the team. Things kept running on autopilot. And about 6 months later, we met we haven't met in a while, but we would meet regularly back then for lunch still. We met, and he's like, I'm going to sell the podcast. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I'm reaching out. And he reached out to a couple of people, and he's like, it's because of the system you put in place, because you created the system, Evans, that was able to get all these emails that got this audience. So some coaches came in that were in the real estate space and bought the business. But of course, at this point, I had left, so I didn't benefit from the rewards.
No.
But that's okay. I was happy for him. I was happy that it happened. I was happy that it's still out there. It's still out there actually running right now. It just doesn't have his name on it anymore. And
so walk me through like the business are you able to? I don't know if it's like top secret info, but I'm sure a lot of podcasters or if somebody's looking to start a podcast, like for me, this was just a passion project during COVID. And here we are 200 episodes in, and I still don't really, it's not a business, right? It's not like I'm selling anything. I mean, I'm getting some leads, people are coming in, and some folks are reaching out to come in and do trainings for their companies or come speak. Onesie twosies here and there. This is still like, I love talking to awesome people, meeting awesome people, and getting these conversations out to inspire entrepreneurs. But it's not a business, right? Never thought of it like that. So someone starting a podcast now, for them to think of creating a business engine, what do you recommend they do?
Definitely to, start with the end in mind. What are you looking to do? What's this is the thing that I didn't realize we were doing it at the time. But when we sat down and I said, give me the weekend, I'm going to go home and build your entire business out. How we can, first I asked him, what's your aspirational future? What are you looking to achieve? And then once I heard that, we sort of I reverse engineered it. And then I had to figure out how to attach it to the podcast, because I had no idea at the time. But what I like to think of it is that, it's like a traditional funnel. When you think about funnels, I know you mentioned Russell Brunson earlier in ClickFunnels, and it was my podcast training that he actually licensed, that ClickFunnels licensed and put into his high ticket coaching program. And it's based on the concepts that I learned through Expert Secrets, Russell Brunson's book, being a part of that community. We actually signed up for their coaching program. I learned about sales funnels, how to use funnels. And I sort of took everything that everybody was doing in the funnel world and just pulled it back into the podcast. So for me, it's all about starting with where do you want to go in the end? But, you don't sell. I tell people all the time, you'll probably appreciate this being in the sales world, right? That it's like selling. We started making money when we quit selling.
I get that.
It all became about how much value can you provide to the market. So the value we provided was in the podcast. We focused on nothing but value. Give as much value as possible. It was an interview show. I would let people know now, you don't have to do an interview show. You can do solo shows too. But the goal is to give the value that gives people a transformational shift in belief, right? You're not trying to just pile them on with information, but you're sharing stories that they can start to see themselves in those stories and sort of overcome their false beliefs and objections through those stories. It gives them a transformation to feel like, okay, I believe I can do the next thing, right? You're creating the desire. So we would create the desire for the next step in the podcast. And that's where our lead generation came in, right? So you go from the content, focus on creating really good content. Don't worry about selling. Make sure that you still, like, I really liked what you did at the beginning of your podcast, where you talked about, hey, make sure to come to my group, make sure to come do this. Here's what you can do next, right? So you want to do that. But what we did that was a mistake was we were interrupting the podcast and throwing in like these little mini commercials. Like, hey, we just released this new program. And even if we'd have a testimonial from somebody reading how amazing they got from it, podcast listeners wrote in and were like, hey, we don't like being interrupted. So we listened to them, right? Listen to the feedback and acknowledge them. Let them know that they're listened to, they're seen, and they're heard, because guess what they'll do? They'll keep listening. Mm-hmm. And that's the key, being able to hold that attention by letting your audience know you care about them and you're giving them content that actually helps them shift beliefs. Because it doesn't matter if we told them step by step how to go out and get their next deal. If they didn't believe they could do it, it wouldn't matter if they had the information, right?
That's their BS, right? That belief system.
Absolutely. And that was a key. And the way we were able to do it, and when I look back at it, I had this aha actually just a couple of days ago. We had people like Robert Kiyosaki on the show, Barbara Corcoran, my mind just went blank. Grant Cardone was on there, right? People like that. Those weren't even close to being the most listened to episodes. When I go back and look at what the most listened to episodes were, they were normal, I will just call them average agents, real people sharing a real story, like how they went from losing everything to becoming the biggest condo seller in the Gulf Coast of, Orange Beach in Alabama and that area, right? And how they did it, how they had to go work on a oil rig, and then how they listened to Pat. He told us his story on the podcast at blew us away. Listened to Pat's tapes, his book on tape, and would listen to the podcast, and then built this empire. So it was a story like that. Those would get huge listenership, right? So that's what I would share with people too. Don't worry about feeling like you have to get huge, big name people on, because they tell the same story every time. They're great to have on, but they tell the same story every time. But when you bring somebody who's just a few steps up the path from that person, the listener, they're going to connect more with them, right? Because if you're going to go, I always share this story. I'm like, if you're going to go hike Mount Everest, you don't want some guy at the top of, or like at the top of the mountain and you're at the bottom, just yelling at you with a megaphone, like, come on, Eric, you got it, keep going. You want that Sherpa, that person that's like just a few steps the path above you, so they can, hey, watch out for this. don't slip here. You could fall right here. Right. So that's what you want in your content. And then from there, focus on doing one thing. And this is what I tell people, they still don't teach this. And I actually gave you something. I don't know if you even saw it. It's something for your listeners if they want it, around this. It's taking the listener from listener to lead. That was the biggest win for us. When I go back and look, the reason why that podcast was able to be sold as a business and not just a content marketing piece, was because we had figured out a way to build a list. And they wanted that list. They wanted the listeners, but they wanted that list because the list was 80% of our best buyers. They bought the most expensive things and they bought again and again, and they referred people to us. But it all starts with focusing on the list. So I always tell podcasters, make sure that you get them to do one thing and one thing only. And that's get on your list, right? The next step. Because then instead of treating that list like a transaction where it's like, Eric, you give me your email address, I give you this PDF, see you later. I'll see you on Black Friday when I bombard you with a bunch of emails about buying my thing at a discount, right? We actually created something that was a free resource area that had a ton of tools in it. And that's one way you can do it. I've got other ways that we do it as well. And a new way we do it now is we take people through like an audio, a freebie that's an audio course, like a private podcast that's got multiple steps that just takes them a little bit farther down the belief shifting system, right? That then gets them to send you buyer signals where they reach out to you. But that's the key, is getting them on the list, creating a relationship with your list, not a transactional approach, but a real relationship where you're able to interact with them. You're able to remind them when the next podcast episode's coming. Because the reason we were able to grow and not go backwards is because everybody that was on our list they would continue to listen. So we had a foundation that was built. And then from there, we actually, when they opted into our list, here's a funny story I'll share real quick that I learned. We go to Funnel Hacking Live, which is the big event that Russell Brunson puts on every year. Yep. And we're so excited because I'm telling all these, like, we went there with the purpose of finding people that were doing really, really well with their funnels, because we were trying to figure out how to monetize it still at this point. But I'm sharing with all these guys that we're meeting that are like going up to get these big awards on stage later that week. Hey, we're getting 78.6% opt-in rate. And I remember that number like by heart, right? And they're like, their eyes are bulging, because for listeners listening that don't know, like 30-something% is generally exceptional. And so they're all looking at me like, well, what are you selling? And I'm like, what do you mean? We're selling real estate sales training. They're like, what are you selling like after they opt in? And we're like, well, nothing. We just get them on our list. And then we do. They're like, you need to have like something on that thank you. They're like 8 out of 10 people are going to the thank you page and you're not selling them anything. So what we started doing was, and this is why it was key to get that list first, because when we figured out how to get 8 out of 10 people to get on the list, that meant 8 out of 10 people saw our thank you page where we gave them, we didn't give it to them, but we pulled a module out of our best-selling listing agent course, how you could leave a seller's home and 80% of the time walk out with a signed contract, right? So that was like one of the most powerful modules from one of our big train. I think it was like a $5,000 course at the time. We sold that for $97, either 47 or 97. It's been a while. It's one of those two numbers. We may have played with both, but that sat on the next page and people would buy it. But because they bought it and they got a result from it, because we didn't give them just like this little fluffy piece of the course, we gave them like the meat and potatoes. Yeah. And they immediately would buy the entire course. And, then we also added a page after that. So we really had a true sales funnel where it had an upsell after that, because we figured, okay, if we solve this problem for the real estate agent where, hey, you're going to close 80% of your listing appointments, what do you need? You need more leads. So on the next page after they bought that, there was like, hey, by the way, if you'd like this inbound, it was either an inbound or outbound lead generation course training, we can give you that too. So when they bought both, we had a hyperactive buyer. So we'd have somebody hop on, reach out to them and say, hey, you could buy all our trainings for this amount, big number. Or if you want them right now, instead of paying like 25,000, we'll sell them to you for like 15,000. Right. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but that was the gist of it. Right. So we just started figuring it out. If we can get so many people on the front end, the audience, a big number, that funnel gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But the key was the list, the way we treated those people, because not everybody's going to buy right away. Right. So what did we do? We kept building the relationship. We kept reminding them, hey, we just put something new in your resource area. Hey, we've got this new podcast coming out we think you'll like. Hey, we're doing this free training. Here's how you can go check it out. So we created a relationship, because I would look at the numbers and I'd go, hey, we had this huge sale. Somebody just spent like $5,000 or $6,000 from. Where did they come from? Oh, they joined our list like 9 months ago, and now they're buying.
Love it.
So that was the key, is just.
Where did the free resource area live? Because after me and you spoke a month ago or whenever we met, that's where I got the idea to put on a form for anyone who's coming on the podcast to give a resource. And that's how you gave your listeners to Lead's resource. I'll have a link to that. I'll be sure to have the link to that. But the goal is to at some point take it and have that area kind of like you had, because I thought it was a brilliant idea. Where did that live?
Yeah, that lived in a free members area that we created in ClickFunnels, because we were using ClickFunnels at the time. So it could be anything, right? You go high level, Kartra, whatever you have as a free members area. And then I don't want to go too deep into it because I know we're running up on time, but we actually, over time, that free resource area, the people that gave, because we did exactly what you did, right? When we met the first time, I shared this a little bit with you, because we were thinking about this, and when it was Pat that had the idea at first, because we were giving away a newsletter before that, and nobody was opting in. And we're like, we got all these listeners, we're getting like 2 email addresses. So we're like, what can we do? So once again, we were sitting there, and he's like, well, I was watching this thing one time, and they had this thing like something treasure chest. He saw it on TV, like one of these infomercials, and it had this thing and that thing. And he's like, what if we did something like that? And I'm sitting there thinking, no, that sounds good. And we were underneath his house at the time, one of these beach houses. So it's up on posts, right? And he had his studio down underneath it. And he was looking across my shoulder. I'm standing here, and he's looking over me, and he's like looking. I'm like, what are you looking at? He's like, I've got it. He's like, we're going to call it the Agent Success Toolbox. And I'm like, that sounds cool. And he's like, because he was looking at his great grandfather's antique toolbox sitting on the wall, and it just hit him. And so we start riffing. And this is one of those things where it's like, well, what, we could do this, then we could do this. So we just let it all come out and put it all on a whiteboard of what we wanted to do. And some of the stuff we sort of marked off, but by not letting our ego jump in and shut it down, any of the ideas, we had a really cool idea up there. But then I was like, immediately, as the person who's going to have to implement this without a big team, I'm like, how in the heck are we going to get all this content to put in this resource area? And we just looked at it at the same time. We were on such synchronicity at this point with the thoughts flowing. We both looked at each other. We're like, our guests.
That's it.
Right. And so the great thing, what I learned later that was so powerful, is the guest would come on, share a strategy. Like, this is how I, created a farming system for a specific neighborhood that's like blown up my business, and this is what I do. The free thing was always related to what they talked about. So it created the desire for the next step. So it wasn't anything fancy we were doing to get people to get 8 out of 10 people to opt in. It wasn't the landing page. It wasn't the headline. These were all the questions that people asked us. It was because we tied the free thing into a lot of what the person talked about over here in the episode. And then we gave the incentive to the guests, where we actually built out, we were like, look, you can put all your branding on it. You can put links on it. We'll even put your episode in there as well in the members area with like your picture and a little bio and stuff. So we basically built an evergreen lead machine inside of our resource area for that guest. And then when we started showing them the numbers of what we were selling on the back end, we gave them an affiliate link. And at this point, they're now where we were struggling to get guests to promote the podcast. Now, I mean, if you know real estate agents, they love getting a commission check from doing stuff when they don't have to actually do anything, right? I mean, we all do, but so they were promoting the heck out of it. They were even promoting our podcast when we weren't on it, because they knew people were going to funnel through that and they were going to get a commission at some point. So, and all of that came from just giving ourselves permission to not do what everybody else told us to do. Right. Everybody's like, oh, just create an ebook, put it on that next page and, give them an ebook or something and we were like, no, we got to do something different. So we were giving people something that, one, it was important. This is really important. No matter how you create your next step for the lead thing, this is the most important thing, at least for me, was what we gave them was something they could take and put in their business right away. It wasn't something that would take them 6 months to implement. It was something they could take, they could do it the next week when they got in the office and actually get a real world result. And because people were getting real world results we had a guy come to us, told us he got like a $5,000 commission check from something he took out of our free resource area and implemented. And he's like standing there at this in-person event, pulling out his wallet. Like, I know y'all are getting ready to release this new thing. I got my credit card. And we're like, it's not ready yet, but but that's what you produce when you actually serve and give to others first. Think about how you can create more value for them. We weren't focused on selling anymore. We were just focused on creating value, and that built the business and was able to turn it into a business that was able to be sold later.
So good. I think one of the reasons you were able to do that is because you truly understood your audience. I mean, they are realtors. Mm-hmm. It's easy when you do that. I think some of the mistakes people make is trying to go general and not having that, specific person you're going after. But I love that you mentioned focus on serving. So talk to us about your shirt and what is a Servepreneur in the community you're building?
Yeah, the Servepreneur. Well, it came to me to actually have the trademark on the Servepreneur blueprint. So it's an actual system that I'm building out. And it just sort of came to me when I took the time, when I left that business and had some space and started focusing on meditating and doing some morning routine stuff and getting a little bit, not rushing into the next thing. A lot of these things started coming to me. And one of them that came to me was the infinite impact method, which lives inside the Servepreneur blueprint. So it's just a different way of doing business. It's showing up. Like I tell people, and I got this from Dan Kennedy. For those of you who know, Dan Kennedy is an amazing marketer. He talks about cash flow confidence, and you create cash flow confidence by not focusing on money, but by focusing on the value you can give to someone to help move them closer to their aspirational future, their aspirational dream. And for me, that's what being a Servepreneur is all about. It's about focusing on how can I collaborate versus compete? How can I collaborate with that person? I notice a lot of people will say, like, I help, real estate agents get more sales with blah, blah, blah. I always write it that I partner with my ideal client, because to me, it's a partnership. Even though it's not a official business partnership, I'm part of their life now to help them achieve that aspirational future and dream. So I'm really looking at what's going on in the marketing out there. And I see a big shift through a lot of the things we've done. We've done a lot of virtual events over the past 15 months that I help my clients with, and I've done them myself. And what I'm seeing is the shift in the market and how people, the consumer, is wanting from us as the entrepreneur a more authentic, real connection, right? The way you would treat a real human being versus like treating them as a lead, as a data point, right? Not a transaction anymore. And so for me, it's all about the transformation, and it's about serving first. And I'm just looking to build a community of other like-minded entrepreneurs that are looking for the same thing. They're looking for a way to actually take their purpose, their life's mission, and create some of their greatest work to help change the world and change lives of others. So that's where the whole Servepreneur movement came from. And it's a community that I'm focused on building now. And it's got a whole, instead of it just being like a name and a real like, hey, come join our Facebook group, much like what you do, it's got a mission behind it, right? It's got a mission, it's got a purpose. And the reason for me is to create, it's selfish, but it's for me to create and leave a better world for my daughter than there is now. And the best way I can do that is to find other people like Pat that have bigger missions and helping them take that and grow it and make more impact. And that's really what it's about.
That's awesome, Evans. Hey, man, I want to thank you so much for your time. You came, you over delivered. Is there anything that you were hoping I would ask you that I did not?
I love that question. No, not really. I mean, this has been fun. I didn't know where we were going to go with it when we went, but I'm glad you took me down memory lane. I appreciate you asking me about those. It got me excited talking about the old basketball stuff and the stuff in the day. So, if it's okay with you, I'd love to like share with people how they can come join the movement if they'd like to, our free community. I've got something for them if they want to come join us. That would be great. Along with it, you didn't ask me much about the listeners to leads blueprint, which I gave everybody, but what we talked about, moving people from listener to lead with your podcast. And this can be great if you are being a guest on other shows, you don't have your own podcast, or if you do have a podcast. So I wanted to give your listeners something that you could share with them that would hit sort of everybody, not just the podcaster, but also those that are looking to grow their business through podcasts, because it's something that nobody's really teaching. And I basically give you the step-by-step that they can take and implement that as well.
And I'll put a link there somewhere in the show notes. But my goal is to have that. I'm going to create that treasure chest that you were talking about, the free membership, where all the show guests are, whoever wants to give something, their value stuff will be there. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I know somebody that can help you with that if you want me to introduce you.
Yeah, probably.
I'm just talking about me, of course.
I know. Yeah, no, I want to like hand it over to you and say, dude, build the machine. So how can people join the Servepreneur movement, and where can they go?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. So if you're in the US, if you're listening to this, you're in the US, you can text the word serve. That's SERVE, serve to 33777. So in the US, you can text the word serve to 33777. It'll shoot you a link. If you're outside of the US, or if you just prefer going directly to a URL, you can go to servepreneurmovement.com, and that'll take you to the free community. And it's just a free community where we're starting to build other like-minded people. As you and I both know, Eric, if you get in the room with other people that are going in the same direction as you, that are even, some are a little bit above, maybe some are a little bit below in the knowledge and the wisdom, it helps everybody grow together. So that's my goal, is a community like that, so we can impact the world in a bigger way.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Evans, thanks for being here, my man. I could talk to you all day. I learned so much from you, man. You gave me a lot to think about. And for our listeners, Lead, Sell, Grow, the Human Experience Mastermind on Facebook. And also take a minute to check out Relentless Goal Achievers. This is a group where entrepreneurs and people who are just, how you set a goal and then you don't even remember you set that goal, and you're just tired of setting the same goal year over year over year. This is where we stop doing that. This is where I teach you how to get out of your own way, how to be able to set your goals. I guide you to the goal along with you, so that you can set bigger goals and leave a bigger impact on this world. But for now, I want to thank you for listening to the show, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, everybody.